Delighted that you can join us for this talk from the Kerry International Dark Sky Reserve. Big thanks to Georgia Macmillan and the guys for organising all of these sessions, and a huge thanks to our speaker Tom today and to Orla, without whom nothing that you are seeing would have happened. She has been a huge benefit to South Kerry in particular since she joined the Eco Museum's website, our project, and has helped with our various videos. The part of our involvement here stems from the fact that it has been very difficult for everybody. It's almost impossible for us to do anything in terms of outreach with real people, because, as you can imagine, socially distancing in darkness is, when you're using astronomy equipment, is well nigh impossible. And turning on a white light when astronomers are around is even more fatal than COVID. So from that point of view, we have been unable to do anything practical in terms of dark sky presentation. I'm delighted that Tom has agreed to do this talk for us today. Tom has been involved in astrophotography for over 16 years. And as you'll see from his presentation, he is going to focus on DSLR camera use, and he has promised, notwithstanding the huge depth of knowledge he has, to keep it as simple as possible for us beginners in this area. So a big thank you to Tom for doing this talk for us. And without further ado, I'll hand you over to Tom.
That's great. Thank you, Steve. And thank you, Orla. So I hope everyone can hear me okay. I'm unmuted. Yeah, my name is Tom O'Donoghue. I've been doing astrophotography going back to about 2005. I started with a telescope and a DSLR out the back garden, and kind of started what I would call nearly the harder way around with hooking up CCD cameras to telescopes. And since, well, for the last couple of years, I have a remote observatory built in France, and that's where I do most of my imaging. But since I've been in Ireland, I've been getting out with the DSLR camera, having some great fun and learning quite a lot. So I'm hoping I can share what I've learned and show you what kind of pictures you can get with the DSLR, and quite a few of them are from Ireland. And I'll be able to go through settings, a little bit on software. I want to keep the software simple enough, and hopefully there'll be some questions. Now at the end, you can go as difficult as you want with the questions, but the presentation itself will be kind of a beginner's introduction. So let me just start with opening the little slideshow I have, and I'll be flicking between live view just to show you some of the equipment that I have around me here, as well as the some of the software. So let me just start with this. So I hope you can all see just the home page here. This is a shot from Ballinskellig. So this is down in the Dark Sky Reserve itself, down in Kerry. This was a shot overlooking Skellig Mickle and Puffin Island in a very, very dark spot. The light actually at the bottom is a boat that was passing by around the back of the Skelligs at the time. But these are the kind of shots that I just want to go through. The easiest type of, say, introduction to astrophotography, as far as being out in the middle of the night, I find, is star trail shots. This is down Patrick Head in Mayo, and this is where you just put the camera on the tripod, put it down on the ground. I was facing it north to try and catch Polaris at the top, around the 1 o'clock position there on the picture, and just taking incremental shots for about 2 or 3 minutes long. And you can stack them all together into one long shot, and it's just to show the rotation of the Earth, also to try and show some of the colors in the stars, which you just need to play around with your settings a little bit so you don't overexpose the stars. So you can see the beautiful blue stars, some white stars, and some orange and red stars. So this to me is what I always thought was the easiest one to start with. It's just putting the camera down, getting the focus right. You can point it east, west. It doesn't have to be north. You'll get different star trail shapes depending on where you're pointing. In the bottom left of that image, you are actually looking a little bit west at the time. So you can kind of see where the stars are circular, and they're not circular perfectly, and that's just because of the lens itself that I was using. But the circular stars are rotating. This is the Earth's line of rotation around Polaris, the North Star. As you move towards the meridian, or what we call the celestial equator, you can see the stars are long, stretched out and almost in a straight line. And then underneath that again, you're below the meridian and they start to curve in the opposite direction towards the southern pole. So you can have fun pointing the camera in different directions, and also, like I say, trying to get something nice in the foreground and trying to get some color in the stars. For those people who maybe, I mean, I've been in discussions with people, some people don't like being out in the middle of the darkness, or depending on what time of year it is. In summer, you know, summer in Ireland in August or May, let's say, when it's dark, you need to be, you know, out after midnight. But in February, here's a shot taken on a beach where you can still see some kind of residue from the sun. The sun is long set now, but you can see that the stars start to come out. And these are blue hour short exposures, just maybe an hour after sunset, a little bit different to what the golden hour would be for those sunset photographers. You need to stay out a little bit longer. But there's still plenty of things that you can capture in the foreground. And the nice thing is that, again, this is just a single 10-second shot. There was no need to light the foreground. There was no need to do anything complicated. One single shot, and you're able to get the foreground in, a bit of sky, and also some stars. Here's another example where Orion was setting. This was in March. You can see the afterglow from sunset still there, and the stars came out. And the nice thing is you can get out of there before the darkness comes. Some of these places I go to, it might be a bit of a hike, and if you don't like doing those hikes in the dark, blue hour photography is a great way to do, and it's just a nice way to practice composition if you do want to go back at nighttime. There's also blue hour in the morning. This was the lunar eclipse shot. Again, another single, I think this was a 3 or 4 second shot as it was brightening up. This was from the US. I was over there in May. The lunar eclipse was in totality where I was in Oregon. I know you guys had it here as a partial eclipse. So I did see some shots from Ireland taken at the time, but I was lucky enough that I was just in the very edge of totality. So this was early morning. This is 4:30 in the morning. Managed to get the day off work and stay out all night and trying to shoot shots. But the best shot I got of the entire night was in the morning, just as there was enough light to light up the foreground. So everything, single exposure, no need to be taking long exposures to the foreground and blending with the background. So the best one came out, happened to be the easiest setup, which was great. For those of you who do Aurora shots, this is an 8-second DSLR shot. Hopefully we can all maybe start traveling again soon, and Aurora season will be coming around. But it's depending on how fast the Aurora is, it can be anything from 1 second to a 10-second shot just to get the detail in. And Aurora shooting is the best fun I've ever had, because you're just constantly chasing around, looking for locations. The whole sky is changing, so you're always moving your camera position, and you kind of chase it. No matter where you are, you're effectively chasing it across the sky, because it can be in the north, it can stretch from east to west. If it's really strong, it can be down towards the southern horizon if you're in a northern latitude. So Aurora is great fun and quite easy to capture on the camera. Now the big one though, that as we're coming to the end of the season, but at the start of the year, it starts around March for us, is trying to shoot the Milky Way. Now we are in the solar system, and in summertime we point towards the center of the Milky Way. Right in the very center of that image, the Lagoon Nebula is in there in pink. You can see that in your screens, and that's very close to the actual center of our galaxy. And from March to the end of August or start of September in Ireland, the Milky Way can be shot. I'll talk about times when you can do that shortly. But it's great fun, and you can get out, put the tripod down, and you can get a good shot in about 30 seconds. It depends where you are. I mean, the further south you are, it'll be a little bit higher in the sky. When it's a little bit higher in the sky, you get out of the murk, I guess I call it, on the horizon. There's a bit of cloud in that image, but you can see the stars stop maybe a degree or two from the horizon itself. And that's a bit of cloud, but also you get refraction of the atmosphere and everything. So stars get dimmed, and it's very difficult to get any detail the lower down you shoot. For those who go off on holidays to France or Spain and can bring their camera with them, the center of the galaxy will be a lot higher in that image. It will be, well, I could say a couple of degrees further up, depending how south you go. But it's easier to shoot, and but it can be quite spectacular from Ireland. I always prefer to go to the south coast because there's nothing south and try and get away from the light pollution. Okay, so let me just show you some of the equipment that I have. Okay, can everybody see me back on the camera?
Yeah, we can see you fine.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. So what I had in the slideshow itself was camera and a tripod. So as far as the basic equipment goes, here's my tripod with this is a kind of a complicated, it's not a ball head, it's just a tripod head on top. I don't use this anymore unless I'm doing daytime shots. I just use a simple ball head on top. But I just wanted to show you tripod. This is the first essential piece of equipment that you're going to need. And that reason being that you need to be able to keep the camera steady because some of your shots could be up to a few minutes long, some of them even a few seconds. And you basically can't hold the camera steady after about a quarter of a second. So tripod is essential. Now next is the camera. So this is a DSLR kind of a talk. So DSLR really means it's got interchangeable lenses. I've got a kind of a selection with me here, but what I will do is take a lens, and I like to use the Samyang, the 24mm f1.4. Very, very good focus. They're about 500 euros new. If you're going to be buying lenses, I would always suggest secondhand, and even the same for some cameras because the prices of these can go right up. This, by the way, yeah, I use Canon the whole time, not because I think they're better than anything else. It's just my first camera was a Canon, and I've just stuck with them since. Kind of, you get a feel for the buttons, you know where everything is. They are excellent quality. Nikon are the same, Sony's are excellent as well, Panasonic's. There's plenty of manufacturers out there. I've just stuck with Canon. And the one I use at the moment, this is my main camera. This is the Aurora version. So it's mirrorless, so it's nice and light. But the biggest thing about this is the flip out screen, which is brilliant because you can zoom in when you want to focus, and you can put it at any angle. So even if you're pointing directly up, I can use the flip screen so I can see what the camera is seeing itself. So that's kind of tripod, camera, and the lens. Just go back 1 second. Now I need to share again. Are you seeing my screen again? 1 second. Go back here. Okay, so there's a little diagram here with F ratio, exposure, and ISO. And these are the 3 big settings that you're going to be playing with when you're trying to take shots of the night sky. The raw mode underneath and white balance and focus, I'll talk about those in a minute. But the main settings that you're going to be changing are your F ratio, your exposure, and your ISO. Now your F ratio it's just the ratio of the focal length of your lens to how open it is. And I'll show in a minute what I mean by that. But the main idea is that you open your lens as much as you can. Because a lot of these objects that we're trying to shoot are quite dim, especially things like the Milky Way. And when I'm talking about the moon or Aurora, they're quite bright. But if you want to go out and shoot the stars in the Milky Way, they're a long way away, and there's not a lot of light coming out of them. So you need to open up your lens, get the lowest F ratio, and get as much light in as possible. Now, to get as much light in as possible, you look at the exposure and you think, well, can we not just take an exposure for as long as possible? Yes, you can, but if you're trying to take a picture of the stars, I find with my 24mm lens, after about 15 seconds, the Earth has actually moved so much that the stars aren't round anymore. They're kind of in a little streak or a little line. So when you're taking shots of the stars, I don't like to go over 15 seconds on the tripod. I use trackers, which I'll talk about later, for doing long exposures. But I would normally go with my lens, I would try and take a f2.8 exposure about 15 seconds. Now the ISO is kind of it's like a gain setting on your camera. The lower the ISO, the smoother your image is going to be. The higher it is, it's noisier, it's grainier, but it's more sensitive. So it's kind of pulling in more photons and giving you a brighter picture. Now, once you keep your F ratio at a fixed value, generally your lowest value that the lens can produce, ISO and exposure are inversely proportional to each other. So if you double your exposure, if you want to go from 10 seconds to 20 seconds, that's twice as much light. But you could also go from 800 to 1600 ISO, and that's again doubling the amount of light coming in. So if you if you want to take 30-second shots on your camera and you think, oh, the stars look bad, and you knock it down to 15 seconds, that's half the amount of time, half the amount of light. You can double your ISO to compensate for that. And what I generally find is I have my f ratio at 2.8, my exposure at 15 seconds, and it's my ISO, that's my final setting that I determine what I'm going to do for the shot. Okay, now on cameras, there's a lot of menus in cameras. Again, these are shots from a Canon. But one thing I would do is I always tell people to shoot in RAW mode. Now, on that top left shot, you can see RAW plus, and there's a kind of a little quarter of a circle and L. That's actually a JPEG and a RAW image. So the RAW image means that it's coming off basically unchanged. It's something that you can use in Photoshop and Lightroom, and you can play around with yourself. The JPEG comes off the camera, and there's internal software on the camera that has sharpened it and saturated it, and it's made a few changes to it. But it's great that you get, if you don't have imaging software, if you don't have your Lightrooms or you don't have your Photoshops, when you shoot in JPEG, you can just download straight off the camera. So if the software packages are something you don't have yet or something you don't really want to get into, then make sure that you have your JPEG enabled. But I always like to say, use RAW anyway. Use up quite a bit of memory, but maybe in a year or two, you might get into the software and you might be able to go back to this data and be able to improve it in post-processing. The other thing is that maybe you got a super meteor shot through the frame, and you got a kind of a one in a 100 kind of shot, and you want to save that for later. I would say again, just shoot in RAW for those kind of situations. In the bottom left corner, I've got live view shoot enabled. That's to help with focus. I like to turn it on. That basically means that you're in video mode, and we'll talk about it in a minute. And for color space, for those who do use software programs, I set my color space to Adobe RGB on the camera. And that means when I import it into Photoshop, that the colors should be effectively like for like. Now, that doesn't always happen. You have to play around the balance a little bit, but that's what the color space is. So just going back to the main kind of settings on your camera, this is just a little graphic here on the left of when I say your lowest f ratio. The lens in that left image, in the top left corner, that circle is fully open. So that lowest setting is 1.4. Every time you go up what we call a stop, you go from f1.4 to 2 to 2.8, you're halving the amount of light getting in. So because it's area, the area is squared for the radius. So when you square f1.4, you get 2. When you square f2, you get 4. When you square 2.8, you get 8. So even though you're doubling your f ratio, you're actually halving the amount of light that's getting in. Now, some lenses that you might get, like the stock lens with a Canon, it may only start at f4. So as you can see in that f4 image, you've lost an awful lot of light already. What we like about the DSLR images cameras is that we can go off and buy lenses from different manufacturers. So as I said, I use the Samyang. I started off with a Tokina lens, and the reason I was using those instead of the Canon was they were sharper and they go lower. So the one I currently use is f1.4. I don't always shoot at f1.4, but there's a reason for that. I'll talk about it in a minute. But this is what the lower ratio means. The lower the ratio, the more wide open the lens is. On the right-hand side, then, it's just a kind of a comparison of what different ISO settings and exposure can do. So the exposure for each of those images, it's effectively the same amount of brightness, but you have you're halving in each picture. You're halving your exposure time, and you're doubling your ISO. So that this is where the trade-off comes. We ideally want a picture like the top left. We want it nice and smooth, and well, for this purpose of this demonstration, it's a long exposure of a daytime object, 1/8 of a second. In the bottom right is kind of what we will get when you set your cameras up for. Thank you, whoever did that. In the bottom right, we get the more like the night shots, because we're going to have to bump up our ISO. You can see it's at 12,800 there. That's quite high, but that is the kind of thing that we will be getting on your night sky shots. That kind of purpley and green mottling, that's just because it's dark. There's not much light coming into the camera. So you've had to bump the ISO up quite a lot. So it's quite a bit of gain, bit of noise, but this is what we're going to see. In daytime shots, people generally won't be using ISO that high unless you're into high speed wildlife or maybe sports photography, where you need to help the sensitivity of the camera to get something that's fast moving. Okay, so I did say use the lowest setting possible here So I've got f1.4 on the left, which is my camera lens wide open, f4 on the right. Now, the only reason I actually shoot at f2.8. So I stop down my camera 2 stops. And the only reason that you would do that is just because a lot of lenses have, well, defects, really, optical defects at the edges. You can see the stars on the left here. They come out all these weird shapes. You can get triangles, you can get these weird eye drop effects. We have coma, astigmatism. There's a lot of problems with lenses when they try to shoot with starlight. This is the same shot, step down to f4. So a lot of the defects are gone. There's still a bit of trailing in the shot. I'm not sure how long I exposed it for. That's probably still coma on the lens. I think the center of the lens was, the stars were a bit circular. But the whole point here was I stopped it down, that's 4 times to f4. And that was just to get rid of all these horrible triangles and misshapen stars. So in this case, if I'm stopping down from f1.4 to 4, I need to increase the ISO by 4 times. So I would go from 800 to 3200 to try and get the same amount of lighting. Okay, let me go on to the next screen. One quick thing I'll talk about is the histogram. I always check the histogram on the back of the screen. The camera is, again, like the JPEG mode. That once you take a JPEG off the camera has done its own type of fixing or processing on the image. So it'll sharpen it, it will saturate it. And when you're in the dark too, your eyes get adapted. So when your first photo comes off the back of the screen, a lot of the time it'll look beautiful and bright, but when you go back and put it on your laptop, you think, oh, it looked a lot better on the back of the screen. So I always check the histogram in the back. On a Canon camera, it's a double tap on the info button. With every picture that you're showing, it brings up the histogram for that specific image. Now, a histogram is just a black to white graph. So if anything on the left is black, so if there's dark shadows, or if there's not, if you're in a very, very dark side, a lot of your image will be black. So there'll be pixels on the left. The x-axis is the black to white. Anything on the far right would be white. So stars should be showing a few pixels there. And on the y-axis, you have the amount of pixels. So in this particular image, this is kind of what you want to get for a daytime shot. There's nothing is underexposed and nothing is overexposed. Everything fits nicely into the histogram. The black section on this would tell me that there's probably some dark shadows in there, like there might be some trees that might appear very dark in the image. In the mid-tones, there's quite a bit of information in the mid-tones and a little bit in the white. So this is what you always want to check with an astro image. I try to get the histogram so that the peak here that you see on the left-hand side, that it's around 30 to 50%. And once that's right, I know I've got some good data coming into my camera. So the point being, always check with a histogram and don't get fooled by the image that you see in the back of the camera once it comes off. You might still be underexposing and you might need to increase your aperture or go for a little higher ISO. Just on setting the ISO too, one of the important things is it depends where you're shooting from. This was taken in North Dublin here, so there's quite a bit of light pollution. This is out the back of the house, looking at the night sky in December. You can see the histogram. This is what I'm talking about in the top left. So that histogram, not too bad. The first peak is probably all the blacks from the shadows in the trees. The second peak might be the trees in the bottom right, and also the sky. So there's a lot of unused data in there, you could say, at ISO 800. Now, as you increase to 1600 and 3200, you can see that it's getting brighter and brighter, because the histogram is getting pushed more to the right, which means more to the white side of the histogram. But the problem is that when you get to 6400, you're starting to clip what we call the red. In other words, we're getting too saturated because we're picking up all the light pollution of the sky effectively. So this is a kind of trade-off that you can set the ISO quite high, but you need to check your histogram to make sure that you're not starting to get saturated by all the sodium street lights that are out there, or the new kind of white LED lights, which can be even more of a problem. So that if you're in a dark sky, you can get more information. You can shoot at 6400 and you're getting more starlight and you're not getting the light pollution swamping everything. Okay, so three main things to take away from it is f-stop. Get it as low as you can. Exposure time, 10 to 30 seconds, depending on the focal length. The longer the focal length that you use, if you're using a 50mm lens, for example, you might only be able to take 8 to 10 seconds before the Earth is effectively moved, and your stars are kind of coming out in like a linear line, a bit of an ellipse. And ISO, I'd say go minimum 1600, unless you're in an incredibly light polluted area. And I've gone up to 10,000. That first shot from Balanced Skelligs was actually 10,000 ISO, and it was 15 seconds, I think. So that going high on your ISO will bring the noise in, but a lot of the latest cameras, if you've got a brand new one, they're very, very good. The ISOs are quite smooth and they've got quite small pixels. There isn't that much noise. And of course, then the light pollution of your location would also be a bit critical on how high you can set the ISO. Okay, so one or two other things do. If again, for the people who don't or aren't going to be using software packages, I like to check the color bands on the back of my screen, and this is just pure aesthetics. On the left, you might be able to see the sun below the image. That is, I'm not sure the actual what setting is, but let's just say that's 6,000 Kelvin. Just for my own personal thing, if you're shooting raw mode, you can change that setting yourself, so it's not an issue. But I just like to lower it down to about 3,500 because it just looks better when it comes off the back of the camera. The histogram of both of them is exactly the same. You're not changing the histogram. All you're doing is changing how the back of the screen is going to show the results that you're after getting. And I think, so you're not so depressed by looking at all that orange. I like to leave it at the lower 3,500 Kelvin. Okay, so let me just go back to show you the camera again. Am I back in the room, so to speak?
Yep, you are. Yeah.
I'm back in video. Okay, great, thanks. One of the things about the Canon cameras and interchangeable lenses is that I use a Samyang. So when you try to change f ratios, you can't do it with the normal button, which we'll see in a second. I have here, this is an old 50mm lens. If people can see the aperture, this is wide open. This goes as low as, this is actually, I don't know if you can see that. This is f.2 to around f22. And it's currently set at its lowest. That helps. I don't know if that can focus. It's at f2 at the moment, which is wide open. So when you're using a lens that is not of the same manufacturer as your camera, you need to do this manually. So this is one of the things that you get good at in the middle of a field or somewhere in the dark, where you need to know where all the buttons are, and this will become second nature. But I just want to show you that I can set the aperture here, and can you see it opening and closing? There's f2, that's f2.8, that's f4. So that each of these double clicks, so let me start it again. That's a stop. That's what they call a stop. And each time I'm halving the amount of light that's getting in there. Now, the only good thing about doing that is that you're going to prevent against some optical defects on the lenses. But this is beginner's class, so always make sure you've got that open as much as possible so all the light is getting in there. That's the f ratio. For those who are using, say, a Canon lens with the actual software, there's a star button up here on Canon. I don't know what it is on Nikon, but you might have to check the manuals for your own users. When I press and hold that button and I rotate my dial wheel here, you will see the f ratio on the little screen here. Now this, let's see, as ever, too many bits of equipment. So this is the screen that you'll be using to make changes. Because this is a Canon lens, there's no f ratio twist knob like that other lens I was showing you here. I do it through the software. Press the star button, and when I rotate the wheel, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this. I don't know if you can see the f ratio should be flicking. The lowest on this one is f.4.0, and I think it goes up to about f22. So I'm not sure if you're seeing that. But if you have the same lens as the same manufacturer, you change your f ratio with the buttons on the wheel. If you have a different one, like this is a Leica, I think, and over there is a Samyang, you need to manually set the aperture to its lowest value. Other little bits of equipment that will crop up, useful. A timer. This attaches to the camera. It's wireless. This is great for doing long exposures. So for those star trail shots, each of those was 2 or 3 minutes. Now, if your camera in manual mode can only go to 30 seconds, I switch my camera mode to bulb mode, and that means it uses these timers. If you have these timers and you want to do star trail shots, or you want to do 2 or 3 minute shots, for example, when you can track images, you need to be in bulb mode, and you need one of these guys. Very, very useful. You can stand 100 feet away. You can put yourself in the foreground of the image if you want, and you can take single shots. You can take long exposures. It just gives you a bit of movement and a bit of freedom wherever you may be shooting from. The other thing I mentioned, live view mode. So these new mirrorless cameras on their flip screens, the best thing about them really is that they have 30 zoom. So focus is absolutely critical. Well, they're sensitive enough that you can look at a star. I don't need anything bright in the sky. It picks up dim stars, zoom into 30, and I can spend a bit of time with the manual ring focusing. So the main point about focus is make sure if you have a manual and autofocus switch on your lens, make sure to turn it into manual mode. The camera, you'll hear the motor actually, the ring will be actually turned. If you leave it in autofocus, it will try and turn and try to focus on stars. And if they're not bright enough generally for the camera, the autofocus software will pick it up. So they end up what I call hunting, just going left and right, trying to focus in and out. So you can compose a shot, get all your settings right, go for a 30-second shot, hit the exposure button, and all of a sudden the autofocus kicks in, and you lose all your focus. It can be quite frustrating. So on those lenses, make sure you set it to manual focus. If you see image stabilization on them, I always turn that off. That's more for kind of daytime shooting where there's another motor to tilt the lens to help. We don't need it in astrophotography. It's you can do without it. So turn that off and turn on to manual focus. So on a regular camera, I always go into the video mode. So these Canons and a lot of the Nikons have them, where you can go into video mode, and it does the same thing. Now, the older cameras don't let you zoom in. That's what's nice about the newer ones. But you should be able to pick up a bright star, and at that point, you can use the live view screen to adjust your focus ring and hopefully get your star right into focus. If you're using zoom lenses, by the way, just remember that every time you adjust your zoom, you're going to need to readjust your focus. And when you're in the middle of the night in the dark with these kind of lenses where it's an adjustable zoom and a manual focus, it's so easy to bump the zoom, and then you're going to start over again with the focus. I see there's quite a few questions coming in, but I'm just going to hold off at the moment. I'm going to take them at the end, and I can go back to the equipment. I'm just going to keep going for the moment because there's quite a bit of equipment I'm showing you here, so I can get back to that at the end. So thanks for the chat questions, and don't worry, we will get back to you. So focus, very important. In fact, vital. If the moon is out, if you're trying to get a nice shot of the moon is great because it's nice and bright. If there's a few faraway lights and you want to focus your lens on that and take that as your focus, that's no problem. But try and shoot. Don't try and shoot a light that's within about 100 feet of you, because the focus will be different for the objects in the sky. You need something really at a minimum about 100 or 200 yards away, I think, to use as a focus point. You can use a street light, adjust live view or look through the lens itself, focus, and then move your camera to composition. And just be careful not to touch either your zoom section or your focus section if you have one. One other thing I like to do during the night, if I'm out shooting all night, temperature drops, the focus drops. So I always do a focus check maybe every hour if I'm going to be out for a long night, a full night of shooting. Okay, let me just put that down. Let's go back to the presentation for a second. In fact, you know what? Let me just, while I do this, let me see, can I answer some of those questions just before sorry for hopping left and right. So there's a question from AJ. What kind of lens would you use? Any particular specs? I like to use the Samyang lenses. Are excellent. They're cheaper than the Canon, and they do go down to about 1.4, which is great. So that's an awful lot of light in compared to the 2.8 versions that Canon seem to make. How do you make sure the foreground and stars are in focus? You'll see some blending shots that I do later on, and I'll explain then how I do that. You're basically taking one shot for the foreground with one type of settings, and you're taking a second shot for the stars themselves. So the star setting shots are wide open f ratio, but because there may be different distances between, say, a boat or flowers or trees, if they're very close to you, I actually use a longer focal ratio, about f5.6, because that's got what we call depth of field. So more things are in focus there. It also means that I need to sometimes shoot about a 3 or 4 minute shot though. So there's enough light coming in from the foreground. But we'll talk about it in a second. So go back again. So this is just a couple of screenshots of what I was trying to point out. So in case you couldn't see what I was trying to show to the camera there, that start stop, that's a Canon 5D. That is where you turn on live view mode, and that brings up your live image, what the camera sees on the screen, and then you can adjust your focus on the lens. Selection for manual mode, if you don't have the intervalometer or that timer that I was talking about, that you'll be restricted to 30-second exposures, but that's okay. You can see set the focus to manual, and underneath it is the image stabilization buttons that I was talking about. And I think it's set to the off section at that point. If you don't have the live view mode, focusing can be a little bit tricky. You really need to take a shot, play it back or have a look at that photo, and then zoom in with the magnification button and kind of figure out yourself if it's out of focus. I would then adjust the focus ring, change your focus a little bit, take another shot, look at that and zoom in again. It can be quite tedious. The camera mode, if you've got one, is definitely the way to do it. It's pretty quick. And as you say, with the newer type of cameras, you can zoom into 30x, so you know that your focus is going to be spot on. Okay. Like I mentioned there about the manual mode. So when you're in manual mode, this is how you're able to make all those adjustments, like your ISO settings and your focal ratio. You've got complete control of the camera. If you're trying to shoot with TV or AV modes, this is where the aperture is set by the camera, and it's set by the exposure modes are set by the camera. So make sure that you're in manual mode, which is M mode on the dial switches on your cameras. If you're using your timer, you need to be in bulb mode. So this is a little switch that's on all cameras, or it'll be in the main menu for the camera of which mode to shoot in. So manual, if you're not going to be using a timer. Bulb mode, if you want to use a timer and go long exposures. The bulb mode is pretty handy. Well, you can also set remote control settings. So down here, what I like to do is I set the self timer on the camera if I'm not using my my intervalometer, as it's called. And that's because once you're kind of fumbling around in the dark, you might accidentally bump your tripod, you might accidentally touch the camera or hit it, and it can vibrate for a few seconds afterwards. So I like to set the timer for 10 seconds, press the exposure button down. Once you're in manual focus, the focuser won't work, and it'll count down, it'll beep for 10 seconds before it takes a shot. But that can be really, really useful because it'll stop any vibrations or any bumps or bangs that you might have given. So I'd recommend that. And most cameras have kind of 2, 5, or 10-second timers, so that can be quite useful. So the Milky Way and those kind of shots are what I really want to talk about. We're still in Milky Way season. Like I said, it goes from March until kind of the start of September. And of course, being in Ireland, it means that June and July, unless you want to go shooting the blue, are kind of out for us. So I always kind of joke that you get about 12 chances a year if you work Monday to Friday to try and shoot the Milky Way in Ireland. You get like 2 weekends in March, you get 2 weekends in April, another 2 in May, and then you're kind of restricted to maybe another 2 weekends in August. Now I'm saying 2 every month because if the moon is out, I don't go shooting dark sky shots, because like light pollution, the moon will just wash out completely everything in your image, which is a pity. So I always go for travel to dark skies if I can. I always look at light pollution maps, and I always check where the moon is. I use various apps for that kind of stuff. But this is the kind of shot that you can get with this is a static tripod, camera, and a lens. No fancy trackers or anything. What I did here was I took 13-second shots. I took about 100 of them, and I used software to actually stack the Milky Way into a better shot. So when I said that you get a lot of noise in shots, one of the techniques we use is that we put multiple shots on top of each other. The subtle differences between each camera shot that you take at night, when you add them all together, you can eliminate quite a bit of noise. But these are the kind of shots. This is actually from the US, but we can take similar shots from Ireland. Now, I don't know who's very familiar with astronomy or where things are in the sky, but this is the sun down in the bottom left. And basically, we point towards, at nighttime, we point towards that galactic core, which is the center of the Milky Way in summer. In winter, we're kind of we're looking out of our galaxy effectively. So we're, summer Milky Way is the one we really try to shoot. The Milky Way in winter is not bad because it goes past Orion. So Orion is a very popular constellation to shoot at night. But summer is the time that you really want to have a go at. Now here are just some screenshots from an app of what the Milky Way can look like in spring and autumn. Those top 3 shots are looking northeast, east, and southeast. So this is around 5 o'clock in the morning in March. So if you really want to get the Milky Way, it will go in an arc from southeast all the way to north almost. But it's 5 o'clock in the morning. As you move through each month, as you go to April, there's a 2-hour difference effectively every month. So you will see the Milky Way in the same position at 3 o'clock in the morning. In May, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. And in June, although it's not quite dark, it's around 11 o'clock at night. Now, the problem is, of course, because of our summertime, this changes a little bit. I've jumped here from May right up to August and September, just because I wanted to show that at this time of year, so around now, the Milky Way is starting to set in the south to southwest. And you can shoot it around midnight at the moment. In September, it'll be around 10 o'clock. So as soon as it gets dark, you need to get out there and shoot that Milky Way in September. So there are still a couple of weeks left, but right now the Milky Way will be setting. So you're looking for a position where you've got a view to the south or southwest, where you want to get a Milky Way shot. This was a place that I'd been to in the States where I tried that blue hour shot there. I knew, because of the composition and everything, I knew exactly where I needed to be to try and shoot the Milky Way in the gap. So I kind of figured out where all my south and southwest views were effectively. Now, we talked earlier about blending in foreground shots and sky shots. So your first attempts when you put your camera on the tripod, point it where you want to point it. Again, this is facing south. Your shot is going to come out like it is on the right-hand side. So the foreground will look really dark. Say if you can only go to 20 or 30 seconds or even 15 seconds, this is what you will get. A lot of darks, a lot of shadows. But you can see that the Milky Way is there in the right-hand side, but not much of the foreground. Excuse me. So when I was shooting this shot, I took about 100 15-second shots of the sky, and then let the software, which I'll talk about later if I have enough time, let the software put it together. And then from the exact same spot, I went into bulb mode. I put my timer in, and I set it to 4 minutes. I changed my F ratio down to about, I think, f5.6 in this one, and I was able to use the screen again to focus on the mountain in the background. And I dropped my ISO down to about 800. So for foreground shots, I changed the settings completely. I don't want the noise. I want a low ISO number, so I shoot around 800. I have to go really, really long exposure then. And I also shrink down effectively the aperture of my lens. So from going from 2.8 up to 5.6, I think is like 6 times dimmer. And then from halving my ISO down, that's effectively 12 times less light getting in. So I needed to shoot, I think, 4 or 5 minute shot just to get some of that light coming in. And as you can see from the stars, you see what 4 or 5 minutes of exposures do. All those stars are trailing out across the sky. So this is the kind of trade-off. This is where we change our settings for foreground and our focus, and then we change our settings for the sky. Once you let the software at it, then you can effectively blend in your foreground image with the sky image. And there's even still a little bit of noise in the right-hand side. I did also kind of cheat on this one because the stars were streaked effectively in the reflection. So I just did a kind of a copy of the top, flipped it over, and I just put it as a reflection in the lake and dimmed it down a bit so it's not as bright. Just because I thought it looked a bit better. But this is what you can do with the DSLR and a tripod. You don't need the fancy trackers, and you don't need too much software. On the left is what your raw file will look like coming straight off the camera, and what you can, with some pretty basic settings in Lightroom, the kind of effects that you're going to get and what you should see after you do a little bit of processing. Here are the trackers. The one in the middle is actually the one I have at the moment, the Skywatcher one. Very, very popular. It's fantastic for allowing you to point at Polaris or Northern Star and basically counteract the Earth's movement, and lets you use bulb mode and go to 2 or 3 minutes, tracking a Milky Way or a set of stars across the sky So you can drop your ISO, so you can get smoother images. You can increase your exposure to a couple of minutes, and it does a fantastic job of giving nice crisp images. So a stacked or a tracked 2-minute shot is generally better than what the software can do, I find anyway, tracking or stacking 15-second shots to the same amount of time. So if you had like 8 15-second shots, which is 2 minutes, I always find the 1 2-minute frame to be better. So the trackers are excellent, and if anybody has questions on them at the end, we can talk about that. But don't worry, I mean, most of the photos I'm showing you here are straight off a tripod. Camera on the track, on the ball head effectively, and on the tripod. What stacking can do is it can lessen the noise, it can make the image a bit brighter, and it does mean that you can process things better. So if you have your software, you have your Lightroom and your Photoshops, stacking images, whether they're short exposures or whether you're doing tracking long minute images, stacking is the way to go. And we'll talk about software. I'm going to skip panoramas for the moment because I'm running out of time. So how to improve the quality of your images? The first thing is get yourself to a dark sky site. Now this is a pretty terrible map, but you can see Dublin and Belfast are very, very bad as it comes to light polluters. And this is probably worse because this image is a couple of years old. But you can see the whole West Coast is fantastic. I like to go down to Cork and Kerry just because I'm getting as far south as I can, so the meter is a bit higher. Connemara is super. Mayo, we have the North Dark Skies in Mayo, of course, the Kerry skies, and we now have Tyrone, which might be that dark, around that dark blue area up in Northern Ireland there. Western Donegal, fantastic again. But those 2 degrees, 3 degrees between South Cork and North Donegal does make quite an effect on where things sit in the sky, especially when you're trying to chase the Milky Way. I like to get it as, give yourself every chance. Go somewhere dark, go as far south if you want the Milky Way because it's a little bit higher in the sky. The stacking, that's just a zoomed in image. I actually tracked these, but that's just to give you an idea of what one single shot on the left. And this is what I talked about mottling and noise. Noise is uncertainty in the data. Like the old days when we used to unplug the TV area out of the TV and you got the snow. That's no signal. That's all noise. So when we take shots of the sky, there is stuff going on in the background of the sky, so very little signal is there. But when you stack a lot of images, you get something smoother. There's more color in there, and you get a smoother background. All those blue around the stars, that's just that's the quality of my lens. It doesn't focus red, green, and blue to the same place. So that's what those blue halos are. You can use light pollution filters. Here's just an example that was kindly given to me by Albert. So you can, if you're in a dark or if you're in a light polluted area, you can use one of these filters, and it helps cut out things like sodium lights. Of course, now they need new ones because of all the LED lights that we have in the sky. So there are many different types. They clip into the back of the lens, as you can see there, and then you can basically screw your lens in top of that. Here is some of the processing software that I use, and I'm going to just quickly flick to. I'll put this screenshot up at the very end, but I just want to show. Screen sharing stop. Let me just quickly show you what I have in Photoshop. Okay, here's just a quick example of some black and white shots that I took a couple of years ago. This was taken in bulb mode. Each shot was about 2 minutes long, and I just stacked them all on top of each other. You can see the stars, the Earth rotating. But for those who want to do star trail shots, if you have Photoshop, what I like to do is I copy and paste each image on top of each other. Change the blend mode here to lighten. And what it does is the lighter pixels on each image on top all start to shine through. So once you get all your star trail images, let's just give you a quick idea what you do. Set light mode on each single one of them to let just the brighter pixels shine through. And as the stars are moving, they're different in each image. But the foreground remains the same, more or less, because some of the clouds have decided to come in here. But effectively, you can keep changing everything to light mode, and you can see how you can build up the stars that were moving throughout the night, and it shows you a star trail shot. So for those in Photoshop, that's the easiest way to do it. You copy and paste each on top of each other. Each image will appear as a layer. Select each layer and change your blend mode to light. By the way, let me just flick between. Okay, hang on a second. I think I need to switch back again to this screen. When I talked about light mode and Lightroom, for example, when I take a shot, this is a 2-minute track shot from Cork last week. I don't know if you can see over here, this was the file imported. This is straight off the camera. This is 1600 ISO. My F ratio was f2.8. I stopped it down from 1.4 to 2.8 because I wanted to get some nice stars. And it was should be 100, it says 118 seconds because I had a timer set at 2 seconds. So it was a 2-minute shot. I lost 2 minutes because of the 2 seconds, just because of the delay on the timer. And when I imported it into Lightroom, this is what it looked like. Now this was just the output. All I'm doing is I was making temperature adjustments. This is where you can change the, well, it effectively changes the balance of the whole picture. Because the Canon camera I'm using has the infrared filter removed, my photos tend to be quite blue. So I changed it from, here I went to 3,500, here I went to 4,100, which is a bit warmer. And that's the temperature setting here. This is in Kelvin. Higher numbers are warmer, lower numbers are generally bluer. I mean, none of this was with brushes or anything. I was just changing the sliders, exposure, contrast, changing the vignetting, a little bit of saturation. Somebody mentioned dehaze in the comments. I just used a dehaze slider in Lightroom. Then I boosted a little bit with the highlights. So it's not a massive change. They're just that took about 30 seconds playing with the sliders. And what I did was I did this to all my photos. You can see down here, I only used about 8 of these images. I took all of these images and I go to a free software called Sequator. Let me just quickly show you that. So I'm fine-tuning this because I've kind of all out of time. I've already hit 50 minutes. Sequator is a free program. The Mac version is for Windows. The Mac version, I think, is Starry Sky Landscape. I think that might be a €30 charge. But what's beautiful about Sequator is you don't need the fancy tracker. If you have, search for these now, sorry. If you have taken 30-second shots, of course I've lost them. If you've taken 30-second shots or up to 30-second shots, you can stack them here. Now the software will stack them, and it's got a fantastic thing where it freezes the ground. 1 second. Got way too many. 3 castle head. So here are my raw shots. I'm just going to sort of open 6 of these. These are the shots that I made the small adjustments to each one in Lightroom that I just showed, and then I imported them in here to Sequator. Now what Sequator does is it will align by the stars, and it will freeze the ground. Now, freezing the ground is the best bit. So what you do is you actually paint in the bits that you want the software to stack. So you just take the mouse. You don't have to go right down to the rocks. You can do this. So it's going to freeze the ground. So the software will just stack these bits, because of course, if you don't freeze, I'm going to give it a name. All right. I'll leave it there. I'll just call it test. I'm going to leave that space there. So what it'll do is it'll look at each of those 6 or 7 shots that I've added in. It'll align the stars and it stacks them, and it'll try and freeze the ground. Now, the ground freezing in this case isn't going to quite work because each shot that it's looking at here is about 2 minutes long. So my tracker was already tracking the stars. So you can see the foreground is kind of blurry, and that's because as this tracker was moving and following the stars, it was rotating effectively to the foreground. So the foreground is a bit messed up in this anyway. But if you have if you've been taking short enough exposures like 10, 20, or even 30 seconds, what you'll find is that Sequator is absolutely excellent at holding and freezing the ground. So it has now stacked these shots, which you can now export, open in Photoshop, and make a few final tweaks. you can see it's done some strange stuff here to the foreground. I'm just going to quickly jump back to Photoshop because I just want to show you how good this how good this product is. So this is that photo that we were looking at earlier. I'm just going to make it a little bit brighter for a second, just so we can we can see what's going on here. So this was 20 individual images that I opened up with that Sequator software for stacking. And what it did was it stacked the stars. You can see the Milky Way is in there, and it froze the foreground. So in short exposures, the ground it's going to hold the foreground, and it did a fantastic job. There's no issues there whatsoever. If you're looking at that shot from Cork again, track shots, very good quality, lovely round stars that we see. But because each shot was 2 minutes, the foreground had effectively, the Earth had rotated, and I was following the stars, so the foreground was bad. And here's what happens: it stacks the foreground, and it makes a bit of a mess out of it. So there were times when, if I have my tracker, I won't even use it, because if there's complicated items in the foreground like trees or grass or flowers or anything with small detail that's close to the camera, I dump the tracker. I think you're better off just taking shorter exposures where the stars haven't moved far enough between each exposure. And Sequator will do a fantastic job of stacking them, leaving your foreground, your flowers, your trees, your boats, or the sea, whatever might be in there, and keeps it basically in focus and in view. And then you can blend in Photoshop your foreground to your background. Okay, I've gone way over time. I'm sorry for going so fast at the very end. Does anybody have any questions? was that too basic, or was that just too much information? I'm hoping people were able to pick things up. But if there's any questions in the chat room there that I might have missed or didn't see,
yeah, there's one or two questions there, Tom. Just about one of them says, name a few apps. AJ just asked about name a few apps that you use, such as to check the moon's position in the sky.
Yeah.
And Kieran also asked about what apps, websites would you use to predict when it'll be clear. So have you any favorite kind of apps or?
Yeah, so I'm just looking at one here on my phone. So I use one called Sky Guide. It's great. It shows the Milky Way, it shows the time. You can set your location of where you are. I think it's about €5 or €6. It was a one-off payment as far as I know. I haven't been, it's not a monthly payment. It's excellent. And I use it to show what time the moon rises and sets. So I'll set my location, time of course, and then I'll scroll through the night. I'll increase the time to watch the stars move across the screen in the app. It's like a mini planetarium. And it's great for showing when the sun sets, and then I look to see when the sun is 18 degrees below the horizon. That's darkness, astronomical darkness. And you can just find out where the moon is in the sky. It also shows the the 4 cardinal points, so you know where things are in the sky. So that's Sky Guide. I don't really know many other ones. I know daytime people would use a TPE. I think it's Total Photographer's Ephemeris. More of a daytime thing, but the moon, they recently added the moon and the Milky Way to that. So that's a bit like photo pills that a lot of people use. It will show you where things are in the sky and at what time. So I would say Sky Guide, photo pills is very, very popular, and TPE, Total Photographer's Ephemeris. It's a hard one to say. And that they all just give you the option where you can drop a pin in a certain place, and it'll show you throughout whatever time where things are rising and setting. So very, very good if you want to compose shots against the foreground, like a lighthouse or a mountain. It'll give you the chance to put you in the right spot at the right time. As for weather, I use SAT24. That's SAT24.com. It gives live satellite images in infrared as well for the nighttime, just to show you where the clouds are moving. And I find that excellent, because a lot of times you look out the window, it can be pouring rain, but it can be a cold front passing. You can look at it and you can see that there's clear spots behind it, and I'll take the car and start driving, even though it looks like a terrible day, because you know there's clear spots coming before. But yeah, SAT24, it's only for lifetime imagery. It doesn't give a forecast. For forecasts, I mean, Med-Éireann is a bit vague, but I think they do the best we can given the country that we're in. So I don't really do forecasts much. It's more that I do lifetime checking the clouds. So that's SAT24.com. So for that stacking software, by the way, for doing the Milky Way, that's Sequator. think of equator with an S in the front of it. That's just for Windows. I believe it's Starry. Sorry, I did say, I'll put that screen up a second. Let me go back here. Let me leave these up while I'm saying these things to you. So there's the app guide. Yeah, there it's the photographer's ephemeris, €9. Sky Guide, I think that might be a little bit more expensive. Aurora Forecast is free. Equator is free. I think Starry Sky Landscape for if they're Mac users is €30. The Carte du Ciel, I wouldn't worry about that one. That's for kind of PC users and for people using long range telescopes and that for more tracking certain objects in the sky. Let me just go back to this one again. Deep Sky Stacker, that's pretty good, but again, that's if you're doing kind of shots like galaxies or nebulae. I'd say you're better off still sticking with the PC Sequator and the Starry Sky Stacker, which is, I've actually said it's free. I'm sorry, it's not free. That is €30, I believe. Canon RAW, which comes with any Canon camera. I don't know if Nikon or the other suppliers do it, but it comes with its own little bit of software. So you can make adjustments to your RAW files with Canon's own inbuilt software. But Lightroom is excellent, I have to admit. And then I start with Lightroom and then I basically finish off with other kind of touches in Photoshop. There's some stitching programs there. I didn't want to talk about panoramas because I was going to run out of time. But Microsoft Ice, that works on stitching the moon. That works on stitching if you're overlapping landscape shots. It's very, very good for getting good results with that. PT GUI is the best one I found if you're stitching panoramas, especially when you're using low light foreground shots. But that is €100. So I'll leave that up there. But does anybody else have any questions? I'll just leave that there for a second if you want to look at it. Was that all the questions there, Ola?
Yeah, I think you've covered most of it. Yeah, there's a question from Rob to say, does the Dark Sky have a forum where people can get together for field trips? And I think I might leave that one up to either Steve or Georgia if they would like to say something about their dark skies in Mayo and Kerry.
Well, let me say first, excellent talk, unbelievably helpful in terms of the information. So thank you for that, Tom. And as Orla said earlier, we will have all the information available on our specific Facebook pages and also on the video, which will be on YouTube. In terms of grouping and bringing people together, obviously COVID has slowed that down. We do try and organize events. The Skellig Star Party is probably the biggest event down in our neck of the woods. Hasn't been able to happen for the last 2 years, but hopefully next year we'll be back again. And we will be doing some more outreach stuff. And at any time, if anybody wants any information or help on accommodation or any other detail, just drop us an email and we're more than happy to help. The website is kerrydarkskytourism.com. And Georgia, if you're on there, can you just mention your contact detail?
Thanks, Steve. Thank you very much, Tom. That was excellent. So just from Mayo's point of view, it's a Mayo Dark Sky Festival, happens in October. It will be a cut down version this year, but we will have something, and I'll pop that in the chat. But Dark Sky Ireland, darksky.ie is our national network if anyone wants to get in touch. It's not event based, but at least we can keep connections and share information. But thanks, guys. It's great to network with you all.
Can I just tune in there that if anybody goes to the star parties, if you've been down in Mayo or Ballinskelligs or up in Wicklow, that's kind of where you'll find people out with their cameras, and more than often there's somebody there to help with the settings and actually being outside trying to take the shots themselves. It's great fun. It's good community. Yeah, like it was cancelled this year. Hopefully it'll all be back to normal, and we'll, like we say, we'll be able to remove the social distancing so I can look at someone's camera. I've been close enough to help out, but it's a great place. The star parties, are probably the best places to pick all those things up. And by the way,
Excellent.
I forgot to mention my own.
Well,
My website is astrophotography.ie. It's more kind of the deep sky stuff, but there are some DSLR pictures in there. You can also follow me at astrophoto_Tom on Twitter. That's kind of more where I'll put up the day-to-day shots and kind of the things that I'm doing. So I'm flitting between deep sky and the DSLR stuff, which I'm having so much fun with at the moment. So
excellent.
I hope you all get something out of it. And thank you for joining in, everybody.
Tom, thank you again, and we'll wrap now. And oh, hi Fiona from Australia. There you go. Thank you everybody who's joined us, and for the initiative. It was absolutely brilliant, Georgia. Thank you again. We'll wrap it there. We'll get the video out, and Tom, we'll ask you maybe to go again another time. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a lot more to talk about.
Excellent. Take care, folks, and
Yes, thank you very
clear
much.
skies.